Why You Should Be More Skeptical the Next Time You Read a Health News Article by Rina Raphael from the March-April 2025 issue of Skeptical Inquirer. Last year, wasabi had a big moment. CBS News claimed the sushi condiment could offer a boost in memory, while USA Today suggested it was linked to a better brain. The New York Post noted it had really substantial cognitive benefits. Yes, the spicy green stuff you always wish is guacamole was lauded by the press following the release of a new study. However, what was not mentioned was that the study had a small sample size, was published in a low-quality journal, and was funded by Kinjarushi Co., the leading global manufacturer of wasabi products. Quite literally, Big Wasabi. While that doesn't necessarily invalidate the study's findings, it's relevant information to pass on to the reader, isn't it? It's just one example, but hype is becoming more common as reporters increasingly regurgitate press releases with barely any skepticism or due diligence. This is one reason why in 2016, epidemiologist Gideon Meyerowitz-Katz, MD, started a newsletter where he covers many misrepresented studies, such as headlines suggesting light pollution increases the risks of Alzheimer's, common food pesticides reduce sperm count, or that kimchi helps you lose weight. People don't realize how vague and dodgy a lot of these headlines can be, Meyerowitz-Katz told me in an interview. As the conveyor belt of company-sponsored and academic studies accelerates, so do news stories exalting the trivial and insignificant. Reporters pick up the minutiae of minutiae, like what minute of the day is best to exercise, or quick-fix consumer solutions because the actual scientific breakthroughs are very few and far between, says exercise scientist Nick Tiller, PhD, CSI fellow, and author of The Skeptic's Guide to Sports Science, told me. A big part of the problem is the need for more frequent, eye-catching content. Many publications feel pressured to adapt to the changing media landscape. With shrinking news audiences and dried-up advertising, social media platforms have become stiff competition. Reporters must churn out more stories to compensate, leaving less time for important stories that deserve more attention and less fanfare. Health, meanwhile, is becoming an increasingly lucrative beat, especially as the wellness industry balloons to encompass more and more categories. Wellness is an ambiguous term that can just as easily mean fitness as it does activated charcoal toothpaste. With outlets further incentivized to produce health-related content, more writers are trying their hand at the beat. Those who once covered Fashion Week are now pitching nutrition stories, even though they may be fuzzy on causation versus correlation. There are now wellness sections that resemble health sections, but are seemingly more permissive of pseudoscience and TikTok trends, responding to audience preferences. This might be all the more pervasive for subscriber-based outlets, particularly those catering to upper-middle-income female readers. The New York Times Tea Magazine published a My Detox column in which bold-faced names shared their recommendations to detox, cleanse, and refresh, despite the fact that there is no scientific definition of detoxing. One artist's morning chai latte is made with adaptogenic herbs used since ancient times to fortify the body against ailments. Top media outlets resort to sensationalized headlines such as, "Do you really need sunscreen?" or "Dry brushing, body scraping, gua sha, lymphatic health is all the rage," giving a wink and a nod to controversial ideas and semi-endorsing alternative medicine practices. The New York Times describes how lymphatic massage has been used for generations in restoring balance and bolstering immune function. Controversy inspires a click. Better yet, it sparks a comment section debate. Worse, both sidesism has come for health science, in which holistic healers and naturopaths are offered the same airtime and respect as MDs and Western experts. In catering to their Goop-curious audiences, publications frequently legitimize dubious medical practices. Wellness stories are often not held to the same skeptical or fact-checking standards as health medical reports, mainly because wellness is considered lifestyle content. Consider all the first-person "I tried it" accounts allowed for at-home health tests and dietary supplements. Can you imagine the same leniency for pharmaceuticals? More publications are going all in on this type of service content: shopping guides, how-tos, and product reviews. They're cheap, quick to produce, and can be easily manipulated to improve SEO rankings. Some publications even have their own product shops, blending editorial content with commercial content. For instance, GQ magazine sells a supplement powder to increase your cellular energy and reverse aging. There are still vestiges of journalistic standards here and there, however. Sometimes, although not often enough, there is pushback in the second half of an article. The problem? Most Americans only read the headlines. Clinical psychologist Jonathan Stee, PhD, R-Psych, author of the new book Mind the Science, Saving Your Mental Health from the Wellness Industry and recent presenter for Skeptical Inquirer presents, witnesses a media ecosystem lacking an element crucial to science: nuance. CNN, for example, reported on a study that supposedly found CBD effective in treating heroin addiction. However, the participants in the study were not actively using heroin, and CBD was not used to treat withdrawal symptoms or maintain tolerance. Instead, it was used to help manage cravings and anxiety that were experimentally induced. The findings were clinically interesting, but managing cravings is just one aspect of addiction treatment, according to Stay. Even with more substantial evidence, the effectiveness of CBD would still need to be compared against other medications for managing addiction. It's almost like how propaganda works, where it's sort of a kernel of truth, and then it just gets exaggerated and blown out of proportion. Stay told me, speaking of exaggerated headlines and misrepresented studies. Basically, science is boring, and boring doesn't sell. Other times, reporters don't know enough about scientific research and how to critically assess a study, assuming, of course, they even research beyond the press release. For example, a newly minted wellness reporter could be easily swayed by the Environmental Working Group's yearly Dirty Dozen list, a shopper's guide to produce that purportedly contains high levels of pesticide residue and therefore should be avoided. Every year, Americans are warned about the evils lurking in their produce section. In 2024, nectarines made the cut, singled out by the environmental advocacy organization for being linked to heart disease, cancer, and other disorders. It's a ready-made, media-friendly list that attracts reader interest, and reporting on it seems like a public service too. Here's the thing. The EWG's interpretation is based on extremely high doses, as typical exposures to such chemicals are at infinitesimal levels. A 150-pound adult could consume more than 8,000 conventionally grown nectarines in one day without any ill effects from pesticide residue, even if the nectarines contain the highest pesticide residue recorded by the USDA. But to know that, you'd need to understand the difference between relative and absolute risk, or various types of studies. The number of times I've seen stories report on rodent research as if it was in humans and barely mention the fact that it was in rats, laments Meyerowitz Katz. That's basic common sense, not just scientific literacy. Health studies surrounding risks and exposures are all too frequently taken out of context, stirring unnecessary panic and demonizing harmless foods and products. It takes the authority and the autonomy away from the actual experts who are doing the work on a daily basis to actually ensure that these things are safe. Immunologist and microbiologist Andrea Love, PhD, the newest columnist for SI, who also runs the Immunologic Substack, told me. Reporters would catch these things if they did their homework instead of simply repurposing a study's abstract or quoting the lead researcher as if they were an independent expert. Sometimes they do reach out to other experts, but without a good understanding of the field, they may not consult someone with relevant expertise. Michelle Wong, PhD, a cosmetic chemist who runs the blog Lab Muffin Beauty Science, has seen too many reporters ask for input on product safety from dermatologists instead of toxicologists, regulators, and cosmetic chemists. It'll be the right questions, but the wrong people, Wong told me in an interview. Reporters certainly have a lot to answer for here. To be fair, however, it can be increasingly hard to tell what's scientific and what's not when some of our most esteemed institutions contribute to blatant pseudoscience. More than once, I've pushed back against an editor who rallied for an unscientific practice or product, only to be told a top medical institute vouches for it within their complementary and integrative medicine wing. How can I debunk Reiki energy healing when the Cleveland Clinic offers it? What do I say when the World Health Organization legitimizes traditional Chinese medicine, including a diagnosis called liver qi stagnation, liver damage from emotional disharmony? Institutions likely turn a blind eye because alternative medicine brings in a lot of money. But the adoption of non evidence based medicine means we risk asking the public to trust the expert, and by extension, the journalistic institutions who rely on them. Science communicators worry these issues will only get worse. According to a Gallup poll, Americans' trust in the media dropped to a historic low in 2023, tying with 2016. Meanwhile, although nearly two-thirds of Americans have a great deal or fair amount of confidence in scientists, this number has been declining since the beginning of the pandemic. The content mill doesn't look promising. Tiller, who contributes to several publications, has noticed a trend toward even shorter articles. There are fewer in-depth, substantive long reads, and it seems like even social media posts are getting shorter. According to a Pew Research report, the average time spent on the top 50 U.S. newspapers' websites has decreased to just under 1 minute and 30 seconds, down from 2.5 minutes in 2014. People's attention spans seem to be getting shorter. Attention is today's commodity. That's the currency, says Tiller. To be heard through the noise, you have to be increasingly more concise, increasingly more sensational. Science communicators have only one option: invest in storytelling skills, rely on social media, and use emotive arguments to better appeal to audiences. Michelle Wong of Lab Muffin Beauty Science has a thriving YouTube channel. Gideon Meyerowitz-Katz's Substack, titled Health Nerd, has thousands of subscribers. Andrea Love counts more than 70,000 followers on Instagram, where she debunks fear-mongering headlines. Tiller spends hours talking with journalists who often misunderstand the complex field of science. He emphasizes that one study does not represent a scientific consensus, and that science, while the best process for advancing our knowledge of health, is not perfect. People conduct science, and people make mistakes, have biases, and are subject to certain limitations. The media often needs guidance to understand the real significance of a study, says Tiller, who is frequently asked to comment on why some new sneaker or fitness tracker will revolutionize health. Just because a study's been published doesn't necessarily mean it's gospel. That's too bad for wasabi. But I did just read something about blueberries. Thank you for listening to Skeptical Inquirer Audio Edition. This podcast is produced by the Center for Inquiry at our headquarters in Amherst, New York. If you would like to support our work, please consider subscribing to Skeptical Inquirer magazine at skepticalinquirer.org. It is listeners like you that make our work possible. With your support, we can continue to promote science, reason, and secular values throughout the world. Thank you.